Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. As you're joining, please feel free to mention where you are coming from. We are so excited to start our second installment of the live discussion series on YouTube with Sight for You. My name is Zaidi. I am a marriage and family therapist based in New York, and I am joined with Sayyid Samir Ali, who is a faith-based counselor working at Imam. He also runs the Dean Institute. If you can go on his Instagram page and even like the Imam website, you can find the work that he does. I know many of you may recognize him from his recent 10-week mental health series that he did with Rise Institute. We are so happy to have you here. Oops. And inshallah, today we will be starting our discussion on crafting compatibility for Muslims. So, before you say yes, what are the things that we need to look out for? Oh, I see we have Ava Amir joining, Dr. Ani Shamsi from London, UK. Keep the comments coming. Inshallah, I think we can begin and jump in on what we're talking about, compatibility, what that really means, what matters, what doesn't. The style we're going to kind of take today is we'll walk through some of the most common questions that people ask regarding assessing compatibility, looking at like different boundaries and limits of compatibility, religious aspects of what we should be looking out for as Muslims. We'll compare some things that we take from Western psychology as well. Inshallah, it will be a fruitful conversation. So before I proceed, Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid Samir, how are you doing?
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. It's my pleasure to be here with you, Sister Sarah. And Alhamdulillah, we are here from Sight for You. This is our second webinar on this topic. And as the sister mentioned, we're going to be talking about some of the elements that come into play in the premarital stage when someone is kind of considering getting married to a person. Maybe they've thought about one or two partners that they've spoken with or they feel like they have this compatibility with. And then the questions that will come up when they are discussing, when they are talking to this person, when they want to think about certain things. How should they be kind of approaching this idea of compatibility? What are some of the things they should be thinking about long term, short term, and so on? I also want to mention that the questions that we have, some of the questions that we have, are taken from the survey that we did when we had the webinar recently, the 10-week webinar that Sister was talking about, that I had the privilege to lead. Some of the questions come from the question banks from that. So Alhamdulillah, we're able to kind of make these questions relevant from what you, the viewers, and everyone else have been sharing and asking about, and we're trying to answer some of these questions to the best of our ability, inshallah, today with Allah's help.
Inshallah. Yeah, I guess we can jump into the first question, or should we start with, I think, the ayah that we wanted to like tie back into?
Yeah, let us start with this beautiful verse of the Holy Quran that in surah number 2, I believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the verses in a relationship, right? Between husbands and their wives, between wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Shaykhna, between couples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that beautifully, hunna libasun lakum wa antun libasun lahunna. Okay, when talking about the topic of fasting and breaking the fast and then having intimate relationships between a husband and wife, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully takes this metaphor and he says, women are a covering, are a protection, are a garment for you. And you are the garment for women. So there's the image of equality here. Men and women are equal in their relationship, in their protection, in their covering for each other. A garment protects you from shame and disgrace. A garment protects you from heat and cold. A garment beautifies you and makes you look appealing and appropriate in public. A garment makes you feel that you belong a certain place, and uh, certain people can see you and recognize you. So these are the elements of what a garment really does, kind of in practical terms. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning this metaphor that you should look for someone that can be an appropriate garment for you that fits your size and you fit their size.
Hmm. Very well said. And I think that's very important to just keep in mind also, like as we're talking about all of these questions regarding compatibility, um, what it is that Islam also kind of requires of us and how we are supposed to like approach these conversations and how we are assessing the other person. Um, so I guess we can jump into the first question, which is what is the goal of even assessing compatibility? Like, why are we even looking to assess am I compatible with this person or not? We have like arranged marriages. It seems like they look at all these other things, but what exactly is it in assessing compatibility with the other person?
Yeah, I think both psychologically and spiritually, both religiously and kind of mentally, it's important to talk about this idea of compatibility. First thing, religiously, there is this concept of compatibility of between a husband and wife, and
Hmm.
Islam invites us because Islam is an extremely emotionally intelligent religion. It invites us to talk about this compatibility between husband and wife. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the verse, right, that litaskunu ilayha, that you have sukun, or you have stability, really. Sakan also means home. It also means stability between a husband and wife. So, what are the elements that can lead to long term stability, which are important for spiritual growth, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also psychological growth and wellness? This is what compatibility is aimed at. The second element of compatibility in this verse is that there must be mawadda between husband and wife, mutual love, mutual affection. How do you assess that? You don't know this person. Really, you may know about them. You may have spoken with them for a little bit of time, but really, how can you really assess? It's like, to give a very mundane example, right? I'm going to go out and buy a car.
Hmm.
I want to have that car for myself. I want to have a relationship with that car for a long time. This is a very crass consumerist example, but of course, I'm just trying to invite us to think about the fact that how are you going to assess? You're going to take it to a mechanic, you're going to look
Right.
at certifications, you're going to see all the stats about that car. So you're looking to have a long-term relationship with that. So mawadda is the mutual love. And the last thing I will say is that the rahma is mentioned in the Quran in Surah 30,
Hmm.
right? In this verse.
Hmm.
Kun,
Hmm.
and then mawadda, and then rahma, which is mercy. Mercy is
Hmm.
a kind of forgiveness, of understanding, and spreading and sharing the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with each other in that sacred relationship, and also with others as that emerges.
Right. Absolutely. And I think another key point is that it's not even about being perfect too when you're assessing that compatibility. It's seeing how all of those values, your communication styles and emotional needs are matching enough for you both to be able to grow together. um, so that's like another one of the goals of when we are like assessing compatibility with the other person.
That's very important. I will say that Islamically, there are two elements of compatibility. One
Hmm.
is Shari, which is the Islamic element of compatibility. And we
Right.
see beautifully the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people came to him. There are two famous cases. One is Miqdad,
Hmm.
where he recommended the marriage of one person with another person based on religious compatibility, based
Hmm.
on deen and khulq, based on faith, and then based on behavior and akhlaq. So
Right.
that's an important element of Islamic
Mm-hmm.
compatibility. Then we have another discussion within Islamic law about urfi, which means what is commonly understood as compatibility, perhaps cultural compatibility, perhaps a compatibility of lifestyle and goals, which I believe is the psychological aspect as well, as you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are two elements, both the religious and then a commonly understood or understanding of compatibility, which is important to build that long-term relationship, inshallah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we can jump into some of the things that are for the next question, which is what are the boundaries and limits of compatibility?
Yeah. So this is a good question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Compatibility doesn't mean that you go and investigate the faults of a person,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're
Right.
facts. They're facts. For example, people always do a lot of research. You get phone calls, at least in my position, about this
Mm-hmm.
person. How are they? How is their family? That's great. But my point or my goal when in a safe space, I'm talking to two people want to talk to me or any other counselor or any other alim, for example, who may be helping people assess compatibility, is not to expose the faults of that person and say, okay, look, they made this mistake, it's done. The
Mm-hmm.
boundaries are you're trying to assess how have they implemented the faith in their life, how have they integrated the faith in their life, how has it helped them transform into a better person. So these are the important boundaries. The boundaries are if you see faults, you're just going to stick to those faults and you're just going to say the person is not compatible with me because of one, two, and three. That's part of the discussion, but I just want to make sure that's not all the discussion. A person is allowed to grow and change, and you may be the catalyst through which they can grow and change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like even just looking at what healthy compatibility looks like, it's really being able to understand each other's differences too. You have two completely different people, like probably different upbringings, and like no one has a very similar upbringing. Even if you live in the same like town and city and same culture and whatever, there's still going to be all those nuances and differences. But it's also going back to how are we respecting each other, how are we understanding each other's differences. um, and that kind of leads me into like the other aspect of it, like what are the essential components of compatibility. So, like, what are those elements that we need to look for in terms of the basics? And then we can also jump into like the secondary that are like nice to have later. But at
Yeah,
its core, like, what is it that we really need to be looking out for?
I think the goal is a wonderful question, right?
Mm,
What are you looking for in terms of compatibility? I think there's some data here
mm-hmm,
that says that couples that understood each other, like you said,
mm,
that made space for each other, they became well adjusted. And on average, it says it took 6 years for that relationship to reach its full potential.
mm-hmm,
Is that compatibility to reveal itself took 6 years, which is not a short period of time when you're talking about a relationship between two people who want to kind of live together and have a life together. So the
mm-hmm,
elements are religious compatibility. First,
mm-hmm,
what does that mean? That's vague, ambiguous. It means that they externally they are the teachings of Islam, and those teachings invite us to behave a certain way, to
mm-hmm.
pray, to fast, to internalize, to integrate our faith into our daily lives, not just to check a box.
Right.
People look for compatibility. They say, "Is this person check all these boxes?" That's important, but much are they integrating the faith into their lives, and how
Mm-hmm,
much can you grow with them? Like you said, sister, you're not looking for someone who's perfect, but religiously, you're looking for someone who's able to reach those goals that Islam teaches about completion and perfection with you. How can that relationship between husband and wife help them grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's very important.
mm-hmm. Right. and each other, like just how we are applying that in our relationship, in our own life goals, outside of even just our religious commitments, but even our own like responsibilities in our familial roles, and even career wise, how that's aligning from a Islamic like decision making perspective too.
I'll tell you, there are cases where all the religious boxes are checked,
Mm-hmm.
but sadly the emotional needs are not being met. So
Yeah.
that's also very possible. So I want
Mm-hmm.
to invite our viewers to understand that it's not just the religious compatibility, there's also the emotional compatibility. Like the verse says, "Litaskunu ilayha." You have sukoon and stability for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to do that if the emotional language is not there? If the psychological assessments are not there? If this person is religious but is unable to communicate, unable to understand their attachment styles, unable to understand what triggers them, unable to understand their love language and express it, that's also an extremely important part of that stability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just having that emotional maturity as a person is another huge part of like when we're assessing compatibility. I also made some notes here of the basics of what we really need is that shared faith and religious commitment, emotional maturity, as you mentioned, good communication. Like we talk about communication all the time, and you kind of touched on it too by like, understanding the attachment styles, plugging part one of the series with me and Dr. Hazari for our emotional attachment premarital video before this one. So check that out. But in terms of like what good communication looks like, what are our problem solving skills looking like together? Um, then we can go into like a whole other thing of like financial responsibilities and all of that. But at its core of like the essentials of what we're looking for in compatibility, I completely agree with you, like the emotional maturity. But is there anything you'd like to add in terms of like what does it mean? Like how are we assessing? What does good communication even look like, and even conflict resolution? But I think we'll touch on that a little bit more in the future questions too. But
Yeah, sure. There's actually a longitudinal study done of 70 couples that have
mm-hmm,
been married for a good number of years, and they studied psychologically what were the elements that predicted success,
mm-hmm,
and three items came up. One of them was empathy.
mm-hmm,
Empathy is holding space for each other, right? Not just
yeah,
saying this marriage is for me, but this marriage is for us. Between
mm,
two people, there's a third element, which is the relationship. So it's good, and I always say this: it's good to imagine that relationship as a person, as a being that has its own needs, that has its own life. These two people can be separately doing okay, but the
mm-hmm,
relationship between them also needs to be nurtured. And empathy is that nurturing of that relationship between husband and wife. So, is there empathy?
mm,
You know what that empathy means. How do you create space for empathy? This is a new person in your life. Can you be empathetic towards them? The issue comes when people start projecting their
mm-hmm,
dreams and desires onto the relationship without being real,
right.
right? There's a fantasy of marriage, and that fantasy is fed into the relationship, and then you compare the relationship to the fantasy, and it's two different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
um so
Fantasy as in like what we're looking for, like in the future of like how our marriage will look like.
yeah, of what marriage
Mm-hmm.
is, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
Disneyland idea, which is not real.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of our psyche, sadly, right?
Yeah.
We don't go back and look at the life of Imam Ali and Lady Fatima alayhim salam and the difficulties they went through. They did not live a fantasy life of marriage. It was very really real and really hard for them. So
Mm-hmm.
what are our ideals that we're trying to reach, using like a PCT, for example, any therapeutic intervention, right? What is the
Mm-hmm.
ideal self? When the ideal self is based in fantasy, then you're always going to face disappointment. When the
Mm-hmm.
ideal self is based in grounded in reality, then you're going to try to build resilience, empathy. The second thing this study said was
Mm-hmm.
self-disclosure. How much
Mm-hmm.
self-disclosure are you willing to do? You're not, when you're looking at compatibility, don't like just let everything hang out there and just give it to this person, right? That happens too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Self-disclose to build that relationship. And then the third thing is open communication. So with these
Mm,
70 couples, they found that these three elements were extremely important in predicting long-term stability. Open communication, styles of communication, like you said. Uh,
mm-hmm,
maybe you could talk a little bit about the styles of communication, the ways that people communicate, how that's important over text, in person.
mm-hmm.
Those things are very important besides the empathy and the appropriate self-disclosure.
Right. Yeah. And that also like leads into a little bit of a discussion of like emotional safety. So if you're communicating properly, then the other person is just feeling like, okay, like when we kind of touching on the attachment discussion that we had with Dr. Zaidi was, someone who's more anxious, their communication style will look different than someone who is an avoidant. Um, but I also wanted to like ask about this is like a common question that comes up, especially in our communities, is how much do these elements matter in terms of compatibility, like your cultural background, your family upbringing, or do we have the same hobbies or personality? Like people are looking at these things like, oh, we both love to travel, we're definitely compatible, or we both come from like an Indian background, so like that means we'll definitely work, or like how much does this actually matter when we're assessing compatibility with the other person?
If you're asking about and you're asking about just not just the two individuals but their families and their system.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a comprehensive premarital study done. I'm sorry, being
I
academic,
love it.
keep
Yeah.
throwing these studies,
We
but
need it. Mm-hmm.
they're really there.
Mm-hmm.
They did a comprehensive premarital study and they realized that family dynamics and cultural dynamics and relationship
Mm-hmm.
dynamics. So
Mm-hmm.
when assessing something just outside, I like to travel, she likes to travel, we both like, I don't know, a certain type of cuisine, whatever it is. And we
Mm-hmm.
both live in big cities or small suburbs, whatever, people are looking for resonance. Resonance is important,
Mm-hmm.
right? But beyond
Right.
resonance, there's also going to be family dynamics. What are the family systems they're coming from?
Mm-hmm.
We always inherit the family dynamics that we were raised in. And
Mm-hmm.
that's hard when you sit in a therapeutic space, revealing the things that happened between mom and dad, the relationship they had, the good and bad they went through. How did they deal with it? What were the communication styles? What were the dynamics that you were raised in? Those are all going to inform the way
Mm-hmm.
you are going to behave with your partner. This is something we're not aware of at all because 9 out of 10 times we're living in that fantasy world that is our ideal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we
Yeah.
want to maybe escape the way that we were raised and do something else, but we can't escape that immediately because our default setting is always going to be the setting that the family dynamics we were raised with. And that comes into play later on. When people
Mm-hmm.
come to me at the end of their rope, we go back and say, well, in childhood, you saw mom and dad doing one, two, and three. That's where this is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So the study did family dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
cultural dynamics. What kind of culture do you prefer? Some people like a fast-paced culture. Culture just doesn't mean your ethnic background. It also means do you want to live in, Houston, Texas, big city, or you want to live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a small city.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you prefer to travel all the time or not? The things that you were saying, culturally,
Mm-hmm.
where is this person most
Mm-hmm.
comfortable? Their
Like
cultural people.
lifestyle. Mm-hmm.
And the last thing is relationship dynamics. So,
Mm-hmm.
communication styles and attachment styles and personal needs, like you were talking.
Yeah, and that just goes back to like we talk about compatibility as in the other person. Like, okay, are this is this person like this? Is this person like this? But a lot of the work, and I'm sure you see it all the time, and as do I in our therapeutic work with our clients, it really goes back to like the self-awareness of who am I, like what actually makes sense for another person to integrate with me, what are like areas I need to work on myself that may affect potential relationships, because you're not really looking for like I had another client that said, oh, I am just this way and I need to find someone who complements me like the perfect puzzle piece that they can deal with how I am currently. But at the same time, it's like, what are those areas, like what do you recognize in yourself, aside from like as we're looking at what are the essential things that we need to look out for when it comes to compatibility, but then also what are those things that you recognize in yourself that you even know what makes sense for like what is compatible for you and what is not, and where even adjustments would probably be made in this like long-term assessment, the 6 years, and that starts from like the premarital stage, right? So of like just talking and really understanding the other person and their families.
Exactly. I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right in terms of knowing the self, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Imam Ali said, right, the person who achieved knowledge of themselves has achieved al-fawz al-akbar, has achieved a great victory. So
Mm-hmm.
knowledge of the it begins with knowledge of the self, of exactly like you said, psychologically, religiously, spiritually. What are my limits? What
Mm-hmm.
are my vulnerabilities? What are my needs? What are my boundaries? What are my growing edges? And how can
Mm-hmm.
this person really help me become a better Muslim, a better person? That's where the conversation should begin, instead of just assessing the other person and really looking at yourself as this static character, which is not true, right? You always grow and change, and what does that look like for sure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at the time too. Go through some of the tougher questions that we got. Uh, one of them was, what do we do if past mistakes or sins come up in conversation? This is a question I get so much. I'm sure even for you as a scholar, also like it's like a touchy area of like, should I even be discussing this thing? This was in my past. We shouldn't really be revealing our sins to this other person as I'm getting to know them for the purpose of marriage. What makes sense for them, like how much should they know and how much should I reveal from like an Islamic standpoint to what's required of me, and what can I also expect from like the other person to share.
Yeah, I think this comes back to two things: self
Mm-hmm.
improvement and self disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to self disclosure, let's begin there. Obviously, you're not required religiously nor psychologically to tell this person everything. They might not be able to hold that information, they might not be invested so much
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship that they'll take everything. I think when it comes to assessing that self disclosure, it has to be done. I would advise it to be done in a safe therapeutic space.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to compatibility, there's a lot of assessments out there. There's this famous Enrich assessment. There's other assessments that you can do to do that, and maybe talk with a counselor like yourself who works on family therapy and who
Mm-hmm.
can integrate religion, and do an assessment for both in a proper way that professionally, clinically tells them, hey, these are the patterns of behaviors I see, because we really are bound by our patterns of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Got a comment in the chat from Sheikna. This question often comes from men with past relationships.
Yeah.
So, in terms of discussing this, how do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I think the second aspect of it is self improvement, right? A beautiful
Mm-hmm.
tradition, if I believe from Imam Ali, if I'm not mistaken, says that a sin is a disease.
Mm-hmm.
The medicine is repentance, and the cure is not to return to this act. How
Mm-hmm.
beautifully medically the Imam talks about a spiritual sin, for
Mm-hmm.
example, or a mistake that Dr. Mehdi is talking about, past relationships. Yeah, it doesn't mean this person who is broken is not able to heal. It doesn't mean that this sinner is not able to repent. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that this person is not looking for a space to grow and, excuse me, maybe have a marriage where they can really meet their needs and become a better Muslim. All those things can be completely valid, and they should be. And they need the religious guidance to bring that together. And to
Mm-hmm.
say the marriage is really protecting half your faith, as the hadith says, right? Why?
Right.
Because it's protecting half your faith. That's big. And there's nothing else that protects half your faith as much as
Mm-hmm.
marriage. So, excuse me. So I think the fact is, how is marriage going to help them grow individually? They have to look deeply inside, and they
Mm-hmm.
set up appropriately in a safe space with their potential partner, so that it's done in a way that doesn't overwhelm the other side. That's
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even when you bring up really great points, Sayyidna, the other part too, like when we're discussing these kinds of things, like in conversation, for you yourself, and like if you notice the other person, like how are they even approaching this conversation? Like it's important to approach that with like mercy and the rahma and the honesty too, rather than like accusatory, like, oh, do you have like criminal history, or like things that like, these are important questions to ask too, especially if it could potentially show up later on in the marriage. So it's not something that like was never discussed beforehand, and then all of a sudden, like the reason I bring up the criminal record is it happened in one of my cases. Like the wife found out that her husband was previously arrested for something that he did. He was like, oh, this was in the past, and like I didn't need to like really share that it was something of the past, like I'm changed or whatever. But the fact that she like found out after the fact, it created a little rupture in the relationship too. So I think you don't need to really reveal every detail like when you share these kinds of things, but it's important to talk about things if it should come up in the future. um, and then also seeing, are you taking accountability for it too, or like saying things like, I've learned from it, I take responsibility, I'm not repeating any of those kinds of patterns, whether it was sinning or if they were like an alcoholic in the past or whatever it may be. And show like, but this is how I've grown from it. So I think that characteristic also is like very important in even looking at the emotional maturity of the person, and um, seeing like the growth matters more than the mistake itself. So that's how I was looking at that too.
Wonderfully put. Yeah, you're exactly right. And the second element of what you were talking about uh,
Mm-hmm.
is the idea of shame. Shame,
Mm-hmm.
what it does is it puts a full stop, a period on this. And
Mm-hmm.
in cases like this, right? The person had a very small record of arrest, and their
Mm-hmm.
partner found out, and then the partner said, "Shame on you," and that was the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shame doesn't allow for accountability to be revealed. Accountability is not about erasing the past. It's about
Mm-hmm.
saying, like you said, I did this, I'm changed. I'm willing to talk about the next steps. What can we do? I can tell you it's not a behavior, it's a pattern, or a pattern that's coming up. How do I
Mm-hmm.
address that now and walk through this accountability and come out a new fresh? That's what Islam is about.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It is about improvement and getting closer to Allah. We can't discard people simply because they made a mistake. We can't do that. It's the point of
Mm-hmm.
right. But
Yeah.
like you said, it needs. I think in these parts, it does need a qualified professional or a elder in the family to advise, to give the right advice, and it's a collective effort. Then it goes
Mm.
beyond just the couple that want to be a partner. It goes to a collective idea of how do we collectively create a space for these things to happen and move forward, because we live in an extremely individualistic culture. We live
Mm.
in a culture that values cancel culture. We live in a culture that is consumerist. I don't swipe, 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 right? I don't like this
Mm-hmm.
person, I like two things, swipe away. So
Right.
that sadly is the default setting that we're coming from.
Mm. I want to touch a little bit like on with this question in terms of like revealing past relationships, because there is like sometimes of a the blame and shame you were talking about. So if someone says, oh man, I did a temporary marriage with another woman and now doesn't want to reveal it to his prospective future spouse, the comment we got. So like things like this, does that also apply, like, how much do we need to discuss in these cases, or how should it be seen, or does this vary person to person? How is that like?
I think in terms of the past, it's
Mm,
important to assess what it means for the relationship,
mm,
because the key is that relationship, which is a third entity between two people.
right.
The relationship needs to be nurtured and protected and needs to grow. It needs to be based on Islam and
Mm,
integrity. So the question is this person's past going to affect the relationship now? Yes or no? Yes, then they must really reveal it in a proper way, that not just
mm-hmm,
overwhelm and dump it on their partner, and the partner may
right.
not have the tools to receive all this information.
Mm,
That's also problematic. If
mm-hmm,
it doesn't have any relevance to the relationship, if it's in the past, and the person has changed and moved on and the relationship is done, then it's gotten irrelevance with the current person. So I don't, there's no point of a self-disclosure there.
Okay. It's good to know of like what at least Islam requires of us too, because a lot of us want to approach this in the most, the best way. Like you don't need to reveal so much or all the details, but in terms of relevancy to the now and future, that's where self-disclosure may be required. Okay, very good. Let's move forward with the next question. If anyone has any questions as we're speaking, feel free to put it in the comment box. We both are seeing all the comments that come in. But we can move forward with the other question here is how to plan for mental health distress that you or your partner may experience, and is that even allowed? I think this is very relevant with like our experience too of what those struggles look like and how do you approach that.
As a marriage and family therapist, I'm sure you see this day in and day out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Couples. So yeah, I mean, going back to the Quranic metaphor, Antun libasun lahunna or hunna libasun lakum, you are a covering for them and they are a covering for you. A covering protects, a covering beautifies, a covering fits your size. And when you have a certain defect in yourself, the covering adapts to that. Let's say someone, just a simple example, they have a cut on their neck, right? Something happened. There's a clothing that they can use to protect that until it heals and then be able to be comfortable in society with that, right? Example.
Right.
So they can add a scarf as a clothing to help them heal that scar and to wear that scar. So when it comes to mental health, it's extremely important that this mercy aspect, wa rahmah, this verse of the Quran that says that there's rahmah between each other, because this mercy allows for growth, for space, and life. They might be going through stuff together, right? We saw COVID. COVID revealed a lot of things. People were stuck at home with each other, and stuff came out. I'm sure I remember those. Like all these things are coming out, and there's space for healing too. So to answer that question, they must keep space between each other to anticipate the individual growing, facing challenges, perhaps encountering any kind of mental illness. No one is immune. No concept. No one is immune.
Right.
The prophetic paradigm is no one is immune from grief or depression or anger or anxiety. How do they deal with it? How do you access the resources for it? How do you set your boundaries for it, right? What are the boundaries? Like, how far can you go before it's too much for you to deal with it? How do you ask for help when it's dealing with your partner's mental health or asking for help for your own mental health? These are very important questions that I believe the next generation will certainly be asking about their relationships.
Inshallah, yeah. And it's also not necessary that you have gone through mental health issues like anxiety, depression, or whatever else. There's like so many new things that come up, like even after marriage, of like mothers after having children, then they start going through postpartum depression. And then how is the husband supporting his wife in that, mental health distress? Or anything can come up even like post marriage, and just like recognizing like, okay, how are we planning for like when mental health issues and struggles come? Am I going to be that type of spouse that's like super religious and be like, oh, what happened? You were like such a religious person that leaned on prayer all the time whenever you had stresses and anxieties about certain things. Like these are real things I see in cases, I'm sure you do too, of how much mental health struggles are being recognized even in like the marriage unit and in the family unit too, of how like in-laws are seeing their like daughter-in-law struggling, or their son-in-law struggling, like if he's struggling financially and like very depressed and stressed out, and like men's mental health, this comes up too of like, am I even like doing all my responsibilities as I should? And sometimes they don't like to discuss things and all these things. So how, as a wife, am I supporting him to my best ability too? And like you said, like how are we accessing the resources that are out there? And really just being merciful towards the other person too, than pointing fingers or feeling like what happened to this person or they changed or these problems and conflicts are inevitable.
I think of the goals in the marriage, in the
Mm,
relationship, and let's come back to compatibility. People in the stage of
mm,
assessing compatibility should
mm,
realize that their goals are long term,
mm,
stability, sukoon. Their goals are building a relationship that bring each other close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they find a space to get closer and they provide the space for that person to get closer.
mm-hmm.
It's just like Allah has mercy and sees our faults, right?
Right.
And sees our defects and helps us when we're struggling, the same way we manifest that mercy toward our partner, because
Mm,
the most intimate relationship.
mm-hmm.
So how are the tools, like you said, exactly going to happen? And I see this all the time. The first thing that goes out the door is spirituality.
Mm,
Anger at God, anger at Allah, not understanding that integrating the religious element of our existence is very important. And
mm,
then when the spirituality starts to suffer, that makes the mental health suffering even worse
right.
because you don't have a tool of coping anymore
Mm-hmm.
to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you invite that in and make sure this person is growing in their spirituality, because that is going to help them address their mental health concerns as a unit, and then also finding the right therapist, the right group, right? Maybe
Mm,
let's say maybe the wife is suffering from postpartum depression or symptoms of it. How can the
mm-hmm.
husband find a group that she
Mm-hmm.
can be part of and she can talk with other women who've gone through this and find support? If
Right.
he's showing a lot of anger, right, which is how men express depression really, is
Mm-hmm.
to put him to say, hey, there's this group being led by wherever these things are going. Why don't you join for a few weeks and see if you can find some therapeutic space? So again, the collective nature comes back.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And we touched a little bit on the extended family too, and like how there can be like pressures and stressors from them. But when we're also like bringing it back to assessing compatibility as well, like it's really important to discuss early on of how involved our families should be, um, the boundaries, how you can handle those external pressures, and how like you and your potential partner will like handle like making decisions, like that extended family opinions, like how do you kind of deal with that, especially in this like assessment compatibility stage.
Yeah, they did a study actually very recently, I believe
Mm-hmm.
in Turkey, a Muslim country, majority Muslim country, and found
Mm-hmm.
that on married couples, and they found that family dynamics contribute a large portion to health, like assessing family dynamics in a proper way, like you're talking about, right? So
Mm-hmm.
family closeness, parental marital relationships. Again, what are the patterns that I inherit? And
Mm-hmm.
someone may not ask those questions until and unless they are required to face that incompatibility. So
Mm-hmm.
part of that compatibility assessment is, what are the patterns that I've gone through in my
Mm-hmm.
life? How do I see my parents? How do I see my siblings? Is there a couple that I look up to that are kind of my paradigm of success without even subconsciously, without even consciously knowing it? And what does that mean when I'm coming into this relationship? I think that's extremely important to kind of keep in mind and assess before moving forward.
Right. And there's still like that element of respect. Like healthy couples, you'll see they respect their families and like kind of how they run things too. Because this is like a huge thing in terms of like with like my work as like a systemic therapist. Like you can't like expect a whole system to change either just because you're noticing some problems stemming from it. But it's also, it is in our responsibility as like husband and wife to also, with appropriate boundaries in place, you don't like let them run your marriage too. So there's like that fine line of how you kind of balance it.
Yeah, this is an important question when it comes to collective cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Arab, Indian
Desi.
Pakistani, Muslim cultures, African cultures, right? Collective cultures, usually you have to have some sort of relationship, meaningful relationship with the parents of your partner, with the family members and friends of your partner. How do you
Mm-hmm.
articulate? And that's
Right.
important when it comes to assessing compatibility for sure, right? What are the
Mm-hmm.
communication styles between you and that person's parents? How can you help? How can you advocate for your needs and also assess
Mm-hmm.
their needs? Because you're obviously marrying one person, but you're integrating into their family. Are they making space for you, for your family, or not?
Mm-hmm.
Are they making space for? Is your partner able to integrate into your family?
Mm-hmm.
And the cult again, here is when the Islamic cultural compatibility comes into play, because we have religious and cultural, and they're both valid assessments within Islam from
Right.
the perspective, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so how do you do that? And how do you do that in a way that meets your needs and your family system's needs at the same time that does that for the other person? This is not something that a person can take on just by themselves. I mean, they would need some professional help, and that's certainly out there to be able to do this successfully.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. There's another question that probably came in from our list of slightly tangential to our current discussion, but it's still important. Do I need to be healed from sexual abuse before marriage?
Yeah, sexual compatibility is extremely important.
Mm,
Islam is very open. In Allah la yastahi min al-haq. Allah is not ashamed of the truth and the things that matter, right? And Islam has some very explicit, very important teachings and guidelines for a married couple once they are
mm-hmm,
married, of what a healthy sexual lifestyle looks like. And
mm-hmm,
Islam realizes that fulfilling this need is a key to a stability and long-term relationship. It's part of that mawadda in the verse. But
mm-hmm,
obviously, at the compatibility stage, they should be prepared, right, within the bounds of modesty. For example, if they have a muta marriage, for example, which is
mm-hmm,
certainly, I see it many times, people rely on it as they should in order to have kind of a probation period between each other to discuss more intimate matters.
mm,
To
mm-hmm.
discuss more intimate matters because they become mahram to each other. That's,
Right, right.
that's the limit of it.
Mm-hmm,
How do you understand that this is a new element in my life? Sexuality is going to be a new element. How do I find help to articulate it, right?
mm,
And because you're not expected to know how to even articulate your need and your style, and also to meet the need of your partner and their style. This is new.
mm,
You and for them in that relationship. And Islamically, modesty and chastity are so important, but only in the marriage, this modesty and chastity are used to completely go out the window in a way. You're supposed to be very open and so on, as the hadith and the fiqh tells us. So
mm-hmm,
how do we make sure that we're taking that Islamic teaching and that psychological element and then applying it and implementing it gradually at an appropriate level, with consent, with understanding, and with meeting each other's needs. So past sexual trauma can
mm,
certainly deter a healthy sexual relationship.
mm-hmm,
Then again, if it's trauma, you need proper clinical intervention to work through it
mm-hmm.
to address it.
Right. Seek that professional help and the resource. Like as a marriage therapist, family therapist, like these things come up a lot. Well, with a lot of therapists are equipped to like handle these discussions, but especially when it comes into the context of how it's working for both partners,
Yeah.
then this is a very big thing that I've even noticed like with my Muslim clients, this is like a topic that kind of it's so taboo slash some people feel like very uncomfortable to discuss this even in the therapeutic space, which goes to like for a lot of other like personal like in-depth like inner work to be done there. um but I've seen cases where they just kind of like, it's so shunned and not discussed as much, but it's still like such a relevant issue that keeps coming up even behind closed doors, like post marriage, because these conversations weren't really had in like the best approach, or even like you said, like a lot of people don't even know where to even begin with this. So I think seeking out that professional help too can also help make that process easier for a lot of people.
I'll share something anecdotally. I was
Mm,
speaking to one of the ulama, and
mm,
he has over 30 years of experience as an alim
mm,
without
mm-hmm.
any professional training in mental health, but the
Yeah.
religious education and a lot of experience doing pastoral counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And he always says this. He says that the number one, over 30 years of experience, the number one
Mm-hmm.
element of disagreement that he sees is the lack of a formulated healthy sexual intimacy. He says it always goes back to that, in his opinion, anecdotally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When he
Mm-hmm.
said that to me, I was taken aback. I was like, wow, this is a person with so much experience that he says, I'm always going to assess in a safe space, in a pastoral
Right.
space,
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like for them. And he's like, when the needs are not being met, it just snowballs and snowballs. So,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And emotionally too, it carries like there's like resentment that's built on into like trickling down to all the other issues within the marriage too, and it
exactly.
just.
Questions of self worth, expression
Mm-hmm.
of need, relationship with self. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. I'm glad we got to cover that. Um, if anyone has any other questions, I think we have about like 5 to 8 minutes left of the live stream. But I think another good topic we can bring up, since we have that's related to like the communication, is the love languages and assessing compatibility. So I will pull that up on the screen as well. Okay. In terms of the love languages, is that something like we should talk about when we're talking to the other person? Like, oh, what's your love language? And that
Yeah.
helps with the
Yeah.
compatibility.
It's important. It's there. It's out there. It's things that people commonly know, and,
Mm-hmm.
and then, right, you don't have to have the same love language as your partner.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be. You have to know how to meet their need for their
Mm-hmm.
love language, and then you have to be able to advocate for your own and express your own. So there might be
Mm-hmm.
a couple where physical touch maybe, and men and women react differently to these things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Really, I mean, I'm going beyond this pop culture idea. Psychologically, there's data that men and women react differently, and their love language needs are different,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Physical intimacy means something else for women, and how they prepare for it is different for what it means for a man.
Mm-hmm.
Receiving gifts are seen differently by men, and so on. So psychologically, we're primed in different ways. So this is a good way, like a general way of assessing and talking about it at the stage of compatibility and saying, hey, what is my love language? What is yours? What does it look like in a relationship? When someone wants quality time together, what do we do? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Going out, watching a movie, dinner, whatever. And from another person is, receiving gifts and giving gifts. What does that look like? I think it's a good starter to kind of talk about compatibility for sure.
Yeah. Because you definitely see this come up later on in marriage too. Because for us as therapists, we often get the cases like far down the line after like so much has happened. But there was like a case where a woman's like, I don't even feel like my husband loves me anymore. We were so good in the beginning, we're compatible. And she's like, try to spend so much time with him, this and this. But then he's like, I'm paying the bills, or like his is like more acts of servicey, and like I put gas in her car yesterday, or this and this. And she's like, you're not really being present here, you're not being present with the family. And of course, like as family dynamics shift too, then these kinds of things surface. So in the therapeutic work, we also like touched on this as like, hey, like his way of expressing um, the need, or like his love and care for his spouse, was a little different. And you have to like recognize that. So even though you don't have the same style of communication or expressing love, it doesn't mean that it's not existent. So like playing into how the other person expects or receives the love can show that effort and the care and the respect for the other person.
Yeah. Yeah. With this love language, exactly. Person just says, this is my love language. I expressed it. What else do you
Mm-hmm.
want? Well, you have to assess the other person's.
Yeah, yeah.
The relationship needs nurturing, and you have
Mm-hmm.
to meet the other person's need as well. It's not unilateral. It's bilateral here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think there's a question on how someone wants to communicate with us. We have our website at Psyched for You. We have our email. I believe that's hello@psychedforyou.org. Um, if someone wants to get in touch with us in terms of just consultation, material that we have on our website, we have some blogs. More blogs are inshallah coming out. And if they want to get in touch with us for counseling as well, then they can reach to our website and they can email us on the website at psychedforyou.org. And then we have our logo up there. So that shows, inshallah. Yeah.
Inshallah. I guess, should we wrap up with final thoughts on when it comes to compatibility? What are some of the main pointers we should keep in mind? I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the final point, sister, would be that always make, I would say, your spiritual life and spiritual resilience and close proximity to Allah as your ultimate goal. Don't lose that. If you lose that, then things become very difficult. Um, that's one point. I would say the second point would be to encourage self-awareness and emotional readiness before assessing others, right? How do you encourage awareness of the self, disclosure of the self, communication of the self, and be emotionally really ready for change in your life?
Right. Yeah. And when we're assessing compatibility, no one is 100% perfectly compatible. There's no such thing as a perfect person or soulmate or anything. A lot of it stems from your willingness to work on yourself, to work on your relationship, to grow together, and that alignment with each other. So, inshallah, with that effort, compassion, and intentionality with everything that we do, seeking out appropriate resources, premarital counseling, I think should be encouraged more than ever, even before you tie the knot, recite that nikah. Definitely seek that out. I think it shows so much, putting the work in the beginning. I just was at a lecture yesterday, in the honeymoon phase, doing that counseling too is going to protect you from so much down the road. So we have so many resources for that. Feel free to reach out, like Sayyid Samir mentioned, to us. You can email us, DM us, even our personal accounts. That's Punasara, Sayyid Samir _0, I think it is. We'll link it in the description. And inshallah, we hope this conversation was useful for all of you. Please share to anyone else who may benefit from this conversation. And we look forward to presenting more psychoeducation to our community and support all of us, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much. Alaikum salam.